everybody. First, let me explain that if my dogs click around on the floor or bark or do something else, it's because it's 112 degrees outside and I'm not going to put them out there. So hopefully they'll just lay down and take a nap. I want to talk to you about the effects of trauma and what trauma-informed care is in my work inside prisons. It all began when I was sat down in front of a warden and I asked him, I said, hey, every warden I ever talked to, when I asked him, hey, what is the ideal program that you would have put into your prison that would fill a great need with your guys? And they always know the answer to that. And they get very excited about it. This particular warden got up immediately, went in the other room, brought back a book. And it was on grief and loss. And he said, these guys have major grief and loss, and everyone's just not even paying attention to it. So anything you can do to help them with that would be great. I said, I'm on it. So I get to thinking about it, and I'm reading it, and I'm talking to people, and it's like scary as fuck. I waited 2 years before I had the courage to walk in and talk about grief and loss and try to offer them something through the arts and through anything I could give them. I'm reading, talking to generals, talking about debriefing guys from combat. I'm coming up with a lot of things, but I'm not coming up with anything that gives me the courage to go inside and open this can of worms with these guys, thousands of guys. And so for 2 years, I wrestled with that. And usually when a warden tells me to do a program, I'm on it the next week. Not with this. It was a burden that I carried. It was a puzzle I did not know, though I understood they needed it. So fast forward, I was doing my master's thesis, and I was interviewing the two of my students that their job used to be to dig the graves and bury the men that would die inside the prison wall. The coffins, to let you know, are cardboard boxes. The men that are burying them usually know who they're burying. The prison in this particular scenario, the cemetery was between two prisons, right behind the old prison that Shawshank Redemption's filmed in. And so one guard would take these two men out to the cemetery. The cemetery was over 100 years old, and it was in the lowest part of the land. We're in Ohio, the water table's high. That's why they didn't build on that, because of the water table. And that's where the cemetery is. So there's no names in the cemetery, there's numbers on the plots. So these guys were explaining to me one at a time, and I'm talking to the second one. He's been in for maybe 35 years. He's got a glass eye as a result, and he's sitting there and he's explaining to me how they go out and they would only have one shovel, and the second guy had to dig with his hands. We're talking about a grave, right? So they knew going in that they had to dig that grave fast enough and furious enough to try to get the body into the ground before the hole filled with water. So they said every single time they would carry him out there. There's not any ceremony or anything. You're just carrying it out there. And they would start out fast and furious and ask, please let us have another shuffle. No, y'all might attack me. Just do it that way. And the guard got great joy out of watching the men dig with their hands. So they would dig it out, and then think maybe it's deep enough and long enough, and they'd put the body down in there, or they would lift it back out if the water was coming in. That it's just this cycle of trying to beat the water, get the hole big enough, and get the man buried with some respect. And they said every single time they would lose to the water. Every single time they will have handled the cardboard coffin so much that it would have collapsed. And every single time they would have to just surrender, because the guard's standing there giving them grief, and they're traumatized over this. I mean, can you even imagine? And they would finally put the cardboard in the bottom of the hole and lower the man down on, and then therefore covering him up with dirt, literally. So this particular man, I'm interviewing him, and when I get through, I'm just I don't know, I'm just talking to him about grief and loss because this death has brought that up to my mind. And so I explained to him how the warden wanted me to do this and how I was afraid I'd open a can of worms, and the week that I would be gone, they might commit suicide, they might kill somebody, might go to just act out and go to the hole, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I was really afraid to do this, though we really needed it in there. And he just sits back, crosses his arms, and looks at me. Miss B, are you through? And I said, yes, I think so. And he said, let me tell you something. There's no can of worms to open. It never leaves our head. It never leaves the front part of our mind. When we sleep, we relive it over and over and over. There's no getting away from it. There's no can of worms. There's nothing to open. It's right there. So any little thing that you could bring to us that would bring us some serenity would be more than welcome. And I just sat there like, why did I think this was about me, right? I said, all right, we'll do it. So I start doing this. At first it was called Grief and Loss, and then it ended up being called the Art of Trauma. No, I didn't use the word trauma. Anyway, it was grief and loss to start with. But what I discovered was that it was hardly ever about death. It was hardly ever about losing somebody. It was about all the things they never had, either poverty or addictions, parents' addictions, or just gangs. Everything contributed to this is what I discovered. Something as simple as a red crayon. The other gang, the Crips, their color's red. No, the Bloods are red. So unless you're part of the Bloods, you don't have red. And so he said as a child it was his favorite color and he could never use it or wear it. And he felt that he had lost that, in that it was major important to him because he was always admiring red. That's a simple one. So anyway, what I decided to do is, because we had to have something in the art field to work through this, because grief and traumas and losses are felt in the sensory. What you see, what you smell, what people are saying, what you're feeling, the colors, the sounds, the smells, the taste, everything about it is sensory. And that's where these memories, these unresolved traumas, are stored in a bubble of energy, if you want to see it that way. And they're stored exactly like you could experienced them. And if you're 3 or 4 or 7 or 8, at the time that you experienced it, then you're holding that memory in the same frame of mind. Say you're 5 years old, then you hold that memory and you look at it. You're looking at it, you're visiting it, almost as if to check and make sure it's still there. But you're 5 years old every single time. That's a real key to this. So we're going to have to use the arts, right? It's not going to be this intellectual exchange. It's going to be the arts. So because the guys in the prisons have this trunk, I forget the measurements. It's maybe 24 by 14 by 14 maybe, if it's that big, metal trunk. And when there's an inspection, everything they own has to fit in that. And if it doesn't fit in it, you have to either ship it home or ship it to somebody, and you have to have the money to ship it, or it'll be destroyed and thrown away. And there's no questions on that. So I had to be real conscientious about their living environment and as to what we created, and I needed to make it something that they could continue on with, and that it would be an item that they could keep. So I decided to take hardback books because they would fit, and get ones that were made sturdy, out of sturdy paper, and that nobody's probably going to want to read, like diet books and things like that. So political books they usually don't want to read. So I get a bunch of used books, and so if you put something between the pages, it's going to make the book be like that from the side, a wedge. So you have to cut some of the pages out to make room for what you're gluing in there. So I decided that we would do collages out of things in the newspapers because you don't have to be an artist to do that. So I got us glue sticks and Elmer's glue, and those kind of things appeal to the child anyway on the subconscious level. And I got scissors, had to get the safety scissors. So we got, kindergarten scissors and glue, and that feels right. It feels right, okay? I wasn't ready for so many of the men not to be able to use scissors. You see, they were experiencing trauma and poverty. And where we have, I don't know, I've probably got 15 pairs of scissors in my house. I grew up using scissors. You got to have money for that stuff. And you've got to be living in an environment where you don't move every month. So it's like little girls. How do they, I couldn't believe that almost every single one of the 24 women I did a program with in a women's prison, I had to teach them all how to tie a bow, how to thread a needle, and they did not comprehend a ruler, so I just made templates. We take those things for granted, and we think the person's stupid or they're just not applying themselves or they're joking around. It's a real deal. So I have grown men that can't use scissors. Their motor skills are not developed. They just haven't done that. So we have a cutting class, and this is how you need to trim those collages so it'll look good. And then we had a gluing instruction on how to glue and not mess everything up or get caught up in it or da-da-da. So simple things like that. This is how, as an artist, you do this. So I had them the first week. I gave them all a piece of yellow tablet paper, and I said, this week I want you to write down every single thing that comes to your mind, tangible or intangible, that you feel was a loss or that you grieve or something you just didn't get that you think you should have gotten. And just, there's no rules on this, except don't let anybody, not your best friend, not me, no one, don't call home and say, this is on my list. Keep it to yourself 100% of the time, and then bring this back with you next week, okay? Because you're gonna have to refer to it. So they go, all right, I don't have any problem with that. They bring their list back, and it's filled out front and back, as much things as they can put on it. And I said, so I want you to go through your list, and I want you to pick the 10 most impactful items that's on your list. So they did, just boom, just like that. So then I said, okay, because I expected that to take a bit of time. I said, of those 10, I want you to pick out the 3 most impactful things. Boom, done. They all knew. And I said, now pick one of those, and that's what you're going to collage first. Boom, they knew which one it was. So I said, I want you to go through the magazines and just subconsciously let the magazines speak to you. That makes sense in prison, by the way. And I said, don't worry about what you're going to put. I just need you to put things that remind you or represent what you're working on, okay? I just want you to get it out of your head and get it down on the paper, in your book, okay? And most of these guys are not artists, right? And so they're busy going through the magazines, and then this event happened where one guy said, it was on several classes later, and he says, I just found a really cool guitar. Anybody looking for a guitar? Yeah, I've been looking for a guitar all day. And so that phenomena started happening to where they were aware of what the other one's doing. Well, that's common. I'll talk about telepathy on another day. So they're working through their books and stuff. Well, maybe 3 classes in, this kid, he was probably no more than 21 years old. He was a handsome white kid with curly light brown hair and a grin that went on, and he was radiant. He was just radiant. His uniforms were always crisp, and he just glowed. And the first time I met him, you see, I taught inside the men's dorms. There'd be 256 men that were housed in bunk beds. So when you walk in and it's really, really long, and half of it's dorms and half of it's these buildings, and they've got glass doors in between the bedroom and that. So I take the elevator up, and when I get out, there's always somebody, waiting to talk to me. Some of them have come upstairs, they talk to me downstairs and they come on up. So there was always different things to deal with. Sometimes they had somebody they wanted to introduce to me, whatever. So I had to get all that out of the way before I would turn and go back to where my room was that I taught at the end of the day room. So on this particular day, I turned around to go down to the classroom, and the the young man that I just described was standing right there. Almost ran him over. Now, Ohio is major poverty. It's absolute poverty, and it's mostly the black culture. So, and surprisingly, inside the prisons, there's not as many. I mean, maybe 10% of the classes would be made up of white individuals as opposed to black ones by choice, on their choice. That's a whole nother reason, another story on why I think it was that way. So anyway, I turned around, and this is the very first time I've laid eyes on this kid. And this is the only time in 10 years I did that. I turned around, and immediately what came out of my mouth was, "What the fuck are you doing here? You don't belong here. I mean, my God, what are you doing here?" And he's grinning. He's, "Oh, Miss B." Said, "I just started acting out, and here I am." I said, "You sure don't belong here, and you really stick out." And he had the impact of, like, if you turned around, came eye to eye with an angel. He had that kind of an impact. So anyway, he comes into the class. He ends up signing up for the class, and I'd invited him to anyway. So about the third class in, the chairs and the tables, it's just folding chairs and tables, and it's kind of in a U shape. There's probably 30 men in there. Somebody brought their jam box or boom box, so we had music going on. Everybody's got their magazines, and they're quietly working, and there's not a soul talking. We're all, including me, I'm up at the front table doing my collages, and my team members that assisted me are on the table, at the table too. So we're just like, la la. It was a beautiful day, beautiful music, beautiful energy, very safe and quiet environment. And all of a sudden, this kid that I'm talking about just burst out and said, "When I was 5, I didn't get the gun and Daddy killed himself. I should have got the gun." Well, I wasn't really sure what I would say back to that, but I did have enough sense, had gained. I didn't have this much when I first went in, the sense to wait and let the elders, the older guys that have been in a long time, take that over. So nobody, not one person looked up, and nobody said anything except this one guy that was all the way over to my left. He had done maybe 35 years, an older, distinguished black man with a bunch of gray hair. He didn't even look up or stop what he was doing, but he said very gently, "Tell us about that." And I thought, wow, that's the right answer. I'm glad I didn't muddy that up. So the kid starts telling us about when he was 5, and how his family was in the car, and there was a loaded gun, and blah blah blah. And I said, I want you to stop. And I said, can we act that out? Will you direct us and show us, let us act it out? And he said, "Oh, sure, Miss B, if that's what you want." And I said, "I'm not going to be the mother. I'm not going to be in this. You're not going to be in this. But you need to stand here and describe how we need to put this together." So we put 4 chairs together about the size of an Escort, a Ford Escort. And then he picked Daddy sitting up there driving, Mama sitting next to him. Behind Mama is his 3-year-old sister, and he's sitting behind Daddy, and he's 5. So he said that Daddy and Mama had been fighting all day. Mama was crying. Daddy was screaming, and it was really, really awful. So he was crying, his little sister was crying, and it was just, he said it was just as awful as it could be. And so Daddy, I don't know where they'd been, excuse me, I don't know where they had been, but Daddy screeches up. He said, just screeches up along the curb in front of the house and says, get out. And so everyone's arguing, and he reaches over and he opens the door and pushes his wife out. And she lands out on the grass there above the curb, and he locks the door. And he reaches over, he says Daddy was big and long-armed, and he just reaches behind that escort seat and he pushes his sister out. And then it's his turn to get out. And he said, I'm screaming, Daddy, don't leave me. Daddy, let me go. Daddy, I love you. Please don't do this. And I'm begging with everything that I know to do. I'm 5 years old. And Daddy is not having any part of that. And he's trying to push me out of the seat. I have a little further to go, and I'm 5, not 3. And so I'm fighting with him and clinging to him, and he's pushing me out. Well, just before he gets me to directly over the door where he can push me out, Mother, who's standing outside the car, says, get the gun. The gun was a 357 loaded gun. And on the back of escort seats, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have these stretchy fishnet, kind of a bag sewn onto the back of the seats, put your umbrella and stuff in. But anything you put in there would get caught. I hated them. I couldn't even get my hand and my rings out. And so I had one, but I didn't use it for anything. And so the gun, the loaded 357 gun is in that stretchy net pouch on the back of that escort seat that has a 3-year-old sitting right directly in front of it and a 5-year-old sitting beside her. And so Mother says, get the gun. Get the gun, she's screaming. So now he's trying to hold on to Daddy, trying to get the gun out of the pouch. Can't do either one, is hysterical. And finally, Daddy pushes him hard enough that he lands outside and he locks the door. Daddy drives to the end of the street and blows his head off. And so this kid, at the age of 5, that didn't get the gun out, thought it was his fault. And he's thought it was his fault for over 15 years as he's growing up. And he's acting it out, because that's what you do when you carry something like that. So he's telling this story of everything that's going on, and he's studying it while he's directing it. And then all of a sudden, because now on this day, he wasn't 5 anymore. He has put this together. He's hovering over it. He's looking at it. The people are acting their part out. And he's doing that at the age of 21, 22 years old, not 5. And so he's studying it, and he's looking around, and then all of a sudden, he blurts out, what the fuck? That wasn't my fault. Too goddamn it. My mother and my father, both adults, put a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old in a back seat with a loaded 357. What were they thinking? You talk about we could have all died. I could have died. My sister could have died. The gun could have misfired. It could have shot Daddy. We could have any number. I was fucking 5 years old, and this isn't my fault. It was never my fault. My parents should have taken better care of me. This is not my fault, and I've been suffering from it since the day it happened. It is not my fault. And we all looked at him. I said, how's that feel? He said, it feels fucking good. I'm free. Whenever they finish their books, going all the way through it, because it takes 6 months to do the course, I set it up so they could invite a family member into the visiting room, and it would only be my students and their guests that would be in there, and a guard and me. And so I invited them to go in there and take their books and explain it to the family member, and then they could keep the book or they could send it home with the family member. And everything about that is not policy. So the warden had approved it. So I, being judgmental by nature, I'm thinking his mother, she gonna be white trash. Who would do that? That's just trash, right? She walked in a designer suit, stilettos, nice looking, attractive, professional, successful woman. And I was put in my place and remembered not to, this happens to anybody, right? You don't, I mean, there's no book on how to parent or to how to be married to someone that has mental illness. Anyway, I don't go directly over to any of the members unless I'm called over there. So I'm just walking through, just keeping the calm, keeping the guards at bay, and this mother is crying. And so I'm walking down the aisle, and she reaches over and grabs hold of me. And she said, Miss Briney, I thought I'd handled it. I hadn't handled it. I couldn't figure out why my darling boy was in trouble. I didn't know what to do about him. I thought I'd handled it. So do you see how that whole life, fortunately, he was 21, 22 by the time he realized what was wrong, and he could go another path and he could let go of that. But what if he never had been able to? There was a second, really seems to be a small thing that went on with another student. Around the holidays, I would have to put together, or felt that I should put together programs that address the holidays, because the holidays are a tough time. And so there was this, I told the class, I want you to do a collage about your favorite holiday. And I'm thinking, this will be one holiday in the past, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, or whatever, and they'll do it. So as they started to work on their books, and they'd bring it up to me so I could stroke them and say, hey, that's great, I love it. Everyone in the room made a collage that included all the holidays. And I thought, I almost corrected the first guy. I almost said, I just meant one, but this worked. I kept my mouth shut, fortunately, because all of them had done it. And I thought, why did they do that? Because they hadn't had a perfect holiday. They hadn't had a holiday to look back on, not in poverty. So what they all did was this holiday that had all these symbols, because they weren't really sure which ones went with which holidays. They knew there was a Christmas tree. And so they made this futuristic holiday that they were going to spend with their family when they got out. That's how that morphed. This one young man came up to, this one young man came up to me. It's the only interaction I remember having with him. He was tall and thin, and he was a white kid, dark-headed, and he shows me his book. And so I'm just talking to him about it, and he's got this tree with a Christmas tree in the middle with this real long trunk on it. Anyway, so I'm just, doing my usual, yeah, that's great, and everything else. And he stood there, kind of slumped over, and I saw him turn into a 6-year-old, and he kind of, how your eyes glaze over, and you're just like foggy, and you're somewhere else. Well, he did that, standing beside me, and he said, I never did get my red bike. He promised me every year I'd have a red bike. I never got any presents. I never got my red bike. And he was just looking down, and I said, oh my God. And I remembered how hard I worked to get my red bike and the joy that I had it. And then I said to him, you can't tell anybody this. You can't share it now. You can't let them know what we're talking about. You got to keep this quiet, because I can't be giving you gifts or favoritism. And so I'm whispering and I'm talking, quietly like this, because that was part of the deal. It's almost Christmas. I said, I was in Hobby Lobby yesterday buying stickers for in here. And I said, I always spend at least $100 on stickers. And I said, there was this only one sticker, that there was just one sticker in this cellophane. It's probably, I don't know, what is that, 2.5 inches long at the most, maybe 2 inches. And it was a red bicycle. It was red and chrome, and how rude. It was red and chrome and black, and it had spokes, and every single piece of that bicycle was a separate piece in this construction. So it's 3-dimensional, and it was fabulous. I saw it, it was $5.95, and I'm going, let's spend $6 on one sticker. I picked it up, put it down, picked it up, put it down, and oh, I wanted it. And I thought, you don't need that. You can buy several more stickers for $6. So I put it down, and it was like, it was crying, take me with you. You know, anyway, I resisted. So then this kid comes up and says, I never did get my red bike. And it was like, all right. So I'm whispering to him, telling him this is what I saw, and I described it to him, and I said, if you want me to, I'll go back tonight when I get in town so nobody buys it, and I'll buy that sticker for you, and then you'll have your red bike. And I said, but you can't tell anybody. And I'm whispering quietly, don't let them know we had this conversation. Okay, keep it a secret. And so I went back and got it. So come the next classroom, I'm sure he was thinking, she's not going to have it. She forgot it. Somebody bought it, and I'm still not going to get my red bike, right? But he comes up. This is only the second interaction I ever had with him. He comes up to the desk to show me his collage. And when he does, I said, okay, I got your red bike. I got your red bike. And I said, here, reach down here. I've got it folded over in a piece of paper. I'm going to slide it over to you. And I said, you take it back and very discreetly put it in your book. Don't tell anybody. Don't let them see it. Don't have a conversation about it. Just do it. He says, okay. So I'm sneaking it over to him. I didn't have to sneak it over to him. It was just part of the holiday, you know. So anyway, I sneak it over to him. So in a minute, he comes back up to show me his book. And he had propped that bike up against that long tree trunk. Propped it perfectly. It belonged right there. And he just beaming from ear to ear. He's 6 years old. I said, well, you got your red bike this year? And he said, yes, ma'am, I did. Thank you. That feels pretty good. I said, it does feel good. I like it. Your bike is beautiful, by the way. I wish I had one just like it. Now, that's a tiny little thing. But when you stop and think everything that was around that bike, he had adults that were important in his life promising him and not keeping the promises. So he saw that as a lie, and trust. His trust was breached. His hope was breached. It was like, why should I ask for anything? It's not ever going to happen to me. So can you see all the things that happen as a result of promise, and never deliver something as important as a red bike? I remember my red bike. Anyway, this is running way longer than it should be running. We're at 32 minutes, so I'm going to close it down and not tell you anymore. Hope you enjoyed those. This is Carol Briney on Blast. Please look at my bio above and go to my YouTube for any other videos. Like and share and join on my Instagram, Briney on Blast. And please tell your friends and help us to spread the word. And in my YouTube bio, it gives a lot of different items or topics I can talk on, and put your comments in there as to what else you would like to hear from me. Monkey stories, prison stories, grandmother raising grandkids. There's a whole bunch of different things on there. So thank you for joining me. I love you. I will see you next time around. Stay safe. Well, that didn't work. I'll push it again.